On this week's episode of the Search with Candor podcast, I'm joined by Nate Matherson from Positional, and we're going to be talking all about how to make your content uniquely helpful in 2024, and basically how to fight off this kind of slew of AI content that is going around and make you stand out in the crowd against your competitors. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of season 3 of Search with Candor. I am your host, Jack Chambers-Ward, and joining me this week is Nate Matherson, the CEO and co-founder at Positional. And Nate and I are going to be talking all about how to make your content uniquely helpful. I know a lot of sites have been affected by the recent helpful content updates, and there's a lot of misinformation going around, a lot of controversial hot takes going on as well. And basically, Nate and I are going to drill down and have a look at what can really help you stand out in the era that we're living in right now, with all the crazy content that's being created through spammers and AI and all that kind of stuff. How do you make yourself stand out in the sea and the SERPs that are so volatile and so chaotic at the moment? Before I get to my conversation with Nate, of course, I'd like to say a huge thank you to this week's sponsors, CoreUpdates and AlsoAsked. Let's hear from them now. The first sponsor for this week's episode is AlsoAsked. You can go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic and unique intent research tool. As we probably already know, search intent is at the core of everything we do as SEOs. Even if you're not directly working in content, understanding what your users are trying to achieve through their searches is still pretty important. I think we can all agree. On top of this, Google has told us that it takes up to 9 searches for users to complete their goals. This can be a pretty hard picture to capture, to be honest, with traditional keyword research tools. So what if you could get hold of up-to-the-minute questions that users have asked that have been clustered by intent by Google themselves? Well, that's exactly what AlsoAsked actually does. AlsoAsked mines and organizes Google's People AlsoAsked data in real time, showing you the next most likely question your searchers are going to ask. Best of all, it's completely free. You don't even need to create an account to try out AlsoAsked. Of course, if you do find it useful, there are paid options as well. We have the free, we have the light, and we have the pro options in terms of accounts that you can subscribe to. At the touch of a button from these accounts, you can download not only the questions people are asking, but also the answers Google has selected, the website URLs, and the titles that are ranking for those answers as well. AlsoAsked has the world's only API for People AlsoAsked data, meaning you can combine this data you're pulling from whatever questions you're asking directly into tools. You can combine it with things like ChatGPT to really supercharge your content briefs and transform the way you write content at scale. Go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic intent research tool today. Our next sponsor is CoreUpdates. That is the latest newsletter from the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. You may know Mark from his unsolicited SEO tips and his appearances on this very show. He started this podcast, in fact, and is going to be my co-host every single month on our monthly news recap episodes. But if you just want a bit more Mark, you want all of his unsolicited SEO tips, get them actually solicited directly to your inbox every single week. You get the latest episode of this podcast. You get all of the latest SEO news and articles that Mark has selected and thinks are the things you should be paying attention to. All of that delivered to your inbox every single Monday. So if you want to get, like I said, Mark's usual recaps and stuff, it is one of the best places to go for the latest SEO news and pretty much what you can expect from the best in the industry when it comes to the articles and news that is going on, any updates from Google and all that kind of stuff. Go to CoreUpdates.com and sign up today to get SEO news, brand new episodes of this very podcast, and Mark's SEO tips delivered straight to your inbox. CoreUpdates.com is the place to go. My guest for this week is the CEO and co-founder of Positional, has done a lot of work in SEO and investment throughout the years, throughout his career. Welcome to the show, Nate Matherson.
Hey, Jack. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for coming on. And I should have mentioned you're also the host of the Optimize SEO podcast as well, which I've listened to and enjoyed.
Yes, I'm usually the one asking the question. So I'm excited to answer a few questions with you today. Hopefully it's an interesting episode for your listeners.
We were just talking about this before we started recording. I am usually in that position as well. If I'm ever a guest on a podcast, I am so used to being the host and the one asking the questions. It's actually quite nice to have the tables turn you something, but there is that extra added pressure, right? You know, you've got to kind of like be in a slightly different mindset and in a slightly different mode. But yeah, I think having two podcast hosts usually makes for good content. And I know we have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and I might jab you with one or two questions, so be prepared.
Okay.
And
I'll be prepared.
and I'm excited to get into it. Thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So let's kick things off, I guess, with where you are now. I know you've done quite a lot of stuff in your career so far, despite being relatively young in the game. And let's talk about positional, because I know I have spoken to Zach from your team, really awesome dude, who basically kind of does what I do at Candor, what he does at positional, kind of the marketing and partnership side of things. But this is the first time you and I have sat down together, so let's have a little chat about what was the thought process behind founding positional and how you guys have grown over the last sort of year or so.
Yeah, do you want like the TLDR version, or you want like the full history of how I got here?
Entirely up to you. Entirely, you can go back to I was bullied in high school and that's why I'm a founder now, like whatever you like.
Yeah, well, I think we were all bullied in high school at one point or another. So
I'm wearing a Dungeons and Dragons t-shirt. I'm pretty sure I was bullied in high school.
Try not to think too much about high school if we're being honest. But yeah, we've been working on positional for about like 11 months. So we're very much like an early stage startup. Like God knows the world needs another SEO tool. But we've decided to start positional to build really the tool set that we've always wanted as SEOs. And so we are very much building positional for people like me. I've wanted to start this company for a number of years, but it took me a while to actually do it. So just to give you some background on me, I've been a startup founder really for the last 10 or so years of my career. My co-founder Matt and I started a company when we were in college back in 2014 called Lend EDU. And that's where I spent the first like 6 to 7 years of my career. We built back in college what was initially a marketplace for student loans, a very college student idea. Help college students compare different student loan products in one place. It was the best we could come up with. We didn't really expect it to become our full-time job. It was really just something we were having fun doing on like nights and weekends. But
I think that's true for a lot of startups, right? You don't intend to, but suddenly you realize I'm spending more time on this than my day job. Maybe I should.
Exactly. And I've always just loved building things. And so Matt and I started that company back in like 2014. And given we were essentially like a lead generation business, like we had to figure out how to like acquire customers to our website. And we were in a product space where like the cost per clicks on AdWords could be like 60, 80 or more dollars per click. And as like at the time, as a very like, bootstrap startup being started by college kids, like we simply could not go out and pay like $80 a click on AdWords to acquire someone to our marketplace. And so Matt and I really found content and SEO out of necessity back in 2014 and 2015. We just had to figure out how to acquire customers to our website. And I knew I was good at writing. I had actually done like quite a bit of freelance writing while I was in college. I knew how to crank out content. I think I wrote like 300 or 400 freelance pieces of content before actually starting our business, just as a way to make money in college. And so I knew how to create blog content. But I didn't know how to do SEO. And so we spent like about a year just cranking and creating content. And I wrote about like 100 articles on different like financial topics. And it just started to work. And like we didn't know why. It started to like increase traffic to our website. And it was really at that point that we kind of fell in love with content and SEO as a channel. And over the next like 6 to 7 years, it became like the most important customer acquisition channel for our business. And from a company standpoint, we expanded into a whole bunch of different product areas like insurance and personal loans and home equity loans. And so we competed in what was and still is like a very competitive part of the internet. And that's where I spent like the first, like I said, about 7 years of my career building what became largely a consumer finances blog. We ended up selling the company at the start of 2020. Matt and I took some time off, tried to figure out what we wanted to do next. We actually started another business. It didn't actually go that well. It was in a very competitive SaaS space that we didn't know a whole lot about, if we're being honest. And we eventually then found our way to Positional, like I said, about 11 months ago. And so I said, like, I'd wanted to start Positional back in like 2019, 2020, when we were still working on our first company, because we had built a lot of tooling internally to support our content and editorial team.
I often find that's the case with SaaS stuff, right? Like you often that's totally the case with us here at Canada Building. Also asked, like, that was the conversation I think the team was having with, like, well, we need this thing and we can't find a thing that does the thing that we need it to do, so let's build one. Like you build them out of necessity almost, and then you realize, like, actually other people probably could use this as well. This could be a way to actually market to other people.
Exactly. And the reason we didn't start the company in 2019 was, I think I was just so jaded with SEO. Like, there had been a series of algorithm updates. Like, it was a frustrating time in search. Like, you might remember back in like 2019, there were like some big algorithm updates that we got caught up in. And at that time, like, the last thing I wanted to do was think about SEO again. And so it took me about like 3 to 4 years to actually be like in the right state of mind to start Positional. And with Positional today, we're trying to do two things. One, like, in some sense, we're trying to roll up what is like a very fragmented tool space. Like, if you talk to SEOs, like, sometimes they're buying like, 7 or 8 different tools to do their job. And that was our team. And so we're trying to bring together like a bunch of point solutions into one place. And then at the same time, like I said, build some really awesome features that we've either built before or always kind of wanted that we've just not seen on the market. And so, like I said, it's just been such a joy building this tool set so far. We have a lot of work to do, that's for sure, but having a lot of fun at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, it was cool to kind of, like I said, get in contact with you and Zach and kind of talk through the options for Positional, what you guys are up to at the moment. I find it really interesting that there is still so much room, because, like you said, I feel like everyone is using 12,000 SEO tools at once, whether they're agency or in-house or freelance. I feel like there's always like, oh, I do my keyword research here, and I do my backlink analysis here, and I do my content analysis here, and I'm doing my clustering here, and it's all kind of like disparate little things, and you suddenly realize, like, what a lot of people say about the streaming services these days, where it's like, oh, I've cut the cable and I'm not paying for cable anymore. But like, yeah, you're paying like $400 in streaming services per month instead. So it's the same as cable was. So you're just doing it digitally. And I think that's similar to what people are thinking of, like, oh yeah, I'm saving. I've got rid of, like, say, like a big sponsor like SEMrush or Ahrefs or that kind of, they're the big, more expensive all-in-one kind of package tools. And then you cut down and you find little bits and pieces and you realize that adds up pretty quickly, right? That very quickly adds up as you're suddenly subscribed to half a dozen or a dozen different things at once.
Yeah, and I think Ahrefs and SEMrush are fantastic tools.
Oh,
by
yeah,
the
absolutely,
way.
absolutely.
They're two totally great tool sets, great companies, and there's definitely some overlap with what we've built. Like, we of course have like a few different keyword research tools. We've got a keyword clustering tool. But many of our customers, at least today, already have tools for keyword research. And so for us, we kind of saw those tool sets as like very much like a boilerplate part of the solution. Our keyword clustering tool, is, somewhat unique, but like on the keyword research side of things, we haven't really tried to reinvent the wheel there. I would say where our tool set's like most differentiated is in a couple areas. We have a tool set called Content Analytics, which is kind of like a heat mapping tool, but for a content marketing team. And this is actually one of those tools that we had built internally at our first company. And the reason we built it was because we had like 2,500 articles on our site. We basically covered every keyword we wanted to cover. And our team was spending like 80% of their time just trying to improve what was already there. And we found it very hard to, one, like, identify which pages we should try to improve, and then two, like, where in those pages we can make improvements. And that's what Content Analytics tries to help you to do. We also have a tool set called Internals, which is our tool set for internal linking. It's my personal favorite tool set. I've spent like hundreds of hours.
I love internal links, Nate. I love internal links. You're speaking my language.
It's what I think is a pretty novel workflow and solution for internal linking at scale. But then, of course, we have a content optimization tool, kind of table stakes at this point in time. And we've got a few other tools as part of the tool set. So it's just been, a lot of fun, and hopefully at a minimum, we can replace a few different tools people are using. But then also for other companies that might already have kind of a pretty robust tool set, hopefully they'd get a few pretty unique offerings within Positional.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you've been talking about content so much, because that is actually the topic for this week. And it was something you and I were discussing before the show, kind of organizing like what kind of topics. And I know you have a lot of different passions in a lot of different areas. And we're kind of thinking like, how do we narrow it down and think about something? And I think it's something so many people are talking about with the dreaded advent of AI and SGE and all the kind of, like you were saying, how crazy the SERPs were in 2019. I think the SERPs have been pretty crazy over the last few months as well, for the record. They're pretty volatile and weird and full of Reddit and Quora and other weird things. But I think the topic you brought to the table is really interesting, because we want to make our content uniquely helpful. And I think those two words, and I know just make helpful content is Google's kind of tagline at this point, of like, don't worry about AI and stuff, just do good content. Like, that's not helpful advice. But what we're going to do today, between Nate and I, we're going to talk about that unique helpfulness that's going to make you stand out, right? And I think that is the key, where we're going to have to compete in a busier SERP, a more competitive SERP than ever, arguably, and even in a space where no matter what industry, and you were mentioning like finance and insurance, incredibly competitive spaces earlier on, but I think that is true for a lot of other places. I know I work with like medical clients here at Canada and a lot of other things that are super duper competitive in that kind of YMYL kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's a tough job to kind of prove that you are bringing a uniqueness to your content and prove that you're actually helpful to the user, and not, if you're going by what The Verge has said in their last few articles, not just being a content goblin and churning stuff out for search engines. You're actually doing stuff for users and being helpful, right? That's what we're here to do.
Yeah, the older I've gotten, the more I've taken Google's very simple statements to heart. For example, their statement that we should do what's best for searchers. I used to roll my eyes at that, like back in like 2015. But today, I actually think it's like a fairly good North Star to
Absolutely.
operate from. We had a recent guest on our podcast, Mike Haney from Levels. He's done like an awesome job creating their content portfolio and driving traffic from organic search. And he said that his bar, in terms of quality, he always asked the question, like, what is my piece of content adding to the internet?
Yes.
And I think in general, like you said, the SERPs have been very volatile over the last 6 months. Especially in like the affiliate SEO space, also in some parts of the internet that I would describe as fairly commoditized at this point in time. And I definitely think that like the bar in terms of quality is the highest it's ever been from a content standpoint. Back in like 2014, 2015, 2016, we used to write these like 6,000 word mega guides and rank them for like every keyword under the sun.
The ultimate guide era of SEO. I remember it well.
That was so much fun. And like content quality, like actually did not matter that much. It was at least like for us, like very much like a volume based game.
Yeah.
But I think we started to see like a shift around like 2017, 2018, 2019, where content quality was becoming more important. And we actually had to go through this like exercise of basically like deleting and rewriting like most of the content on our website. And we spent about an entire year doing this. So it was a very painful process to have to go back and improve everything that was already there. And I think the bar has continued to get higher. I think a lot of the sites that were like negatively impacted with the most recent algorithm updates like fully deserved it. Like, of course, there are some sites that are doing like a great job that got caught up in the algorithm updates. And I'm sorry for those websites. But I would say by and large, when I look at the sites that have been pretty negatively impacted, they largely had it coming. And so when I say like to our customers, you want to create uniquely helpful content, I think there are a lot of ways to do that. And where I would start, and I am like a fairly big believer in like eat. I do think it's important. I know it's like
Absolutely.
a pretty controversial topic in some of the SEO circles I'm in. But like one way that like we always try to add like, eat or unique helpfulness to our content is to take like those first party experiences, first party data, and inject them into like our pieces of content and the stories that we're writing. And as just like an anecdotal example, I think like Brian Dean has done a fantastic job of this with like all of the content that he created at Backlinko. For example, like I was reading like a recent article on Backlinko about guest blogging. And like, if we wanted to, we could go to Upwork and like hire someone to write like a 2,000 word blog post on guest blogging, no problem. But when I was reading Brian's post, like it felt like I was having a conversation with Brian. Like he brought in real examples of guest posts that he's done. He went through like his process of finding guest post opportunities and showed you like what the end result was from that process. And I felt like I was having a conversation with Brian. And so I think if there's ever an opportunity to like tell a unique story or provide like a unique insight based on your personal experiences, that makes for more engaging content with the reader. And it also makes for more unique content. And I think Google's algorithms have gotten very good at being able to understand that. But of course, like if you don't have those experiences yourself, you can go out and you can find them. So you can, kind of put your journalist hat on and like conduct an interview or like find experts and ask them questions and then bring those expert insights into your pages. And that is something we're very actively trying to do with our content at Positional. We've got our podcast. There are a lot of like great sound bites and excerpts from the podcast that we're actually taking and trying to inject into our blog posts on similar topics. And so even if you don't have that maybe necessary first person experience, like you can go out and find it. And that's what journalists do. And that's how we try to operate. But of course, there are things beyond just like words on the page. Like I think unique images, graphics, and visuals are super important. They're also just generally helpful for readers and will keep them on your web pages longer. The same could be said for videos. We've had a number of our customers like experiment with video content, integrating it into their pages, and they've seen really positive impacts. And one, like that makes those pages more helpful for readers. Two, it keeps people on your page longer. It hopefully will help someone fully answer their question. And I think Google has gotten very good at understanding metrics like, bounce rate, time on page, scroll depth, in terms of judging the quality of a web page. And so everything that we've done and everything that I'm describing here would help in all of those metrics and in that regard. So there are a lot of ways to make your content uniquely helpful. I think we just have to find one way and try to do it with each piece of content we create.
Yeah, for sure. I think that first-hand experience side of things has been, obviously, it's now the extra E that was added to EEAT, and I think it's been, obviously, an eye-opening experience for a lot of people, but a thing where a lot of people are suddenly realizing how important that can be and how much of a difference it can make. I think you mentioning, video content being an integral part of that, being a more multimedia, kind of multifaceted content creation, I think that has to kind of be the way you do it in 2024, to be honest. As we now speak into a podcast that is on Spotify and YouTube and all the usual places, right? Like, I think bringing that person, you described Brian's article there of like, it felt like I was having a conversation with Brian. That is exactly what I aim for with my podcast as well. I'm sure you have a similar kind of experience, Nate. Like, the reason people enjoy podcasts and relate to podcasts so much, granted, some maybe not the true crime stuff, but more conversational interview stuff like we're doing now, hopefully a bit more chill, a bit more relatable, is that kind of personal, kind of almost like parasocial element to it, right? Which sounds like a negative. I know a lot of people see parasocial relationships as a very negative thing, but feeling like you're just listening in on a conversation between friends can be such a powerful thing, especially if it's in your earbuds or in your ears, like right now. It's such a close personal thing compared to just reading, a wall of text on a web page. It feels like such a different experience. And I think you're totally right. Blending that and having your content across different mediums. So referencing a podcast episode within the article, having embedded videos, including YouTube shorts and YouTube videos or a video version of the podcast or whatever it is. Having that element where you can, for want of a better phrase, make eye contact with the person, have that more personal touch to it to prove it's not just AI churned out rubbish or, written by a robot or whatever it is. You have that personal element straight away.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts here. So I agree with you that I think Google has gotten very good at being able to identify brand signals at both the corporate level as well as the personal level or the person level. Like we've seen this, and I've seen some data where like one of our customers would like go viral on TikTok, and then there would be like a direct positive spike on organic search across like all of the keywords that they rank for. And so I just think generally Google's gotten really good at kind of understanding general brand signals and then using those signals to impact and influence search results for the keywords a website might rank for. The second thought is on like AI generated content. Like I know Google has said mixed things here. I know that they said you can use AI generated content as long as you're not using it as a means to manipulate search results. But like I think something people often forget is that there's been AI generated content for a long time. Like there was AI generated content in 2014. Like it was really low quality, but it worked. It worked really well. Even in like 2014, 2015, 2016, some people would argue that like spun content still works today. I
Yeah.
think like this current generation of AI generated content is much higher quality. But like I actually think it's like the worst thing to happen to content marketing teams in the last couple of years. Because I think teams are spending still a lot of time creating content with these AI writing tools. But at least from my view, I have just not seen it work that well. And I've seen companies run into a whole bunch of indexing challenges.
Oh yeah.
And then two, like as a follow-up point to that, like this content like is not necessarily saying anything new. It feels like I'm kind of reading a Wikipedia page.
I think
And like
that is the key. And yeah.
is that ultimately the content that you want to be trying to convert a customer from? Like because the why we're doing this is to drive traffic to our website to then convert customers from. And like you want to put your best foot forward in having that conversation with someone that could be a future potential customer. And if all that they're reading is like a very boring Wikipedia page, that's not going to convince someone to want to go deeper on your site or to buy your product. And so like everything that we're doing here from like a uniqueness lens and raising the bar in terms of quality, I think is all just going to have a really positive impact on conversion rate too. And it always like kills me when I hear people say like, oh, we're just creating SEO content. Like, I don't believe that. Like we should just be creating content. And if like the purpose is that we're trying to rank for a given keyword, great. But like we should not be creating SEO content. We should just be creating fantastic content.
Yeah, I find the phrase SEO content so weird where like again like that's been discussed so often with the recent updates on the SERPs, with the recent helpful content updates that have been happening, and the discussions from the Verge articles I mentioned earlier on as well, like the fact that so many things revolve around that. You use the phrase manipulating the search results. That's what Google uses as well. Like yeah, that's kind of what SEO is. We're optimizing for search engines. We're writing title tags so people click on them. We're writing meta descriptions so more people are enticed to click on it from the SERP. That's the whole point of that thing. If it wasn't, then it wouldn't exist and you wouldn't give us the option to write those things. But I think you're totally right where at the end of the day, just doing that for the sake of it and creating that SEO content that so many people describe is not going to work in 24. It's not going to cut the mustard in 2024. And especially like you were saying there with the AI side of things, where so much of it is based on previous knowledge. It is running on essentially on a database of knowledge that we have that is a few years old at this point. And even if they're the most up-to-date, super fast LLM in the world, they're still running on existing content. So you're not really contributing anything brand new to the space, like you were saying earlier, Nate, without actually adding something yourself, bringing in either your own experience or, as you said earlier, a subject matter expert or a review from a customer or whatever it is, having that element bringing in there where you have a unique perspective. And I know Google has been focusing on perspectives a lot recently as well. That I think is the key for really pushing that differentiation between good content and like, yeah, fine, it's decent, it's well written, whatever. It could be an AI that's then kind of edited by a human, and the really great stuff that is actually bringing value to your users and is really kind of user focused and driven by your actual what your customers actually want rather than what you think they want.
People always ask me like, Nate, have you seen any like trends in terms of the sites that have performed well with the most recent algorithm updates and the sites that have performed like not so good with all of the recent algorithm updates. And one of like the trends that I've spotted has actually come through like our podcast. We bring on like a lot of like heads of SEOs, heads of content on, and I've noticed like at least anecdotally, it's not like a huge sample size, but the sites that are like doing extremely well through all of these algorithm updates, their content channels are being run by individuals who were previously journalists or in journalism. And like these folks, like that's where they spent maybe the first 10 or 15 years of their career. They know how to do research. They know how to extract like unique information and add value. They have generally just a really high bar in terms of content quality. And so just like an anecdotal trend I've seen is that like some of the best content SEO channels right now were built by previous journalists. And I think that's because they come at it with just this like different bar, that like a lot of, SEO agencies or a lot of other folks who haven't kind of been trained in that style of creation, like, don't have experience in. So I think we should all just be like journalists in 2024. Like, let's think how a journalist would think as we create our content.
Yeah, I think that's a thing a lot of people think about when you're working in digital PR or working in link building and stuff like that. But I think that totally applies to, for want of a better phrase, just creating normal content where you're not actively pitching it and trying to build links necessarily. You are just writing good content. The bringing in like unique data sources and actually doing your own research, I think is hugely underrated. And I am, if anybody has listened to this podcast or my other podcast about movies, I am a research nerd. I will go out and I will read every review of a thing. I will read every article, watch every YouTube video, all this kind of stuff, and just research something to the nth degree. And I think then you can, for my process of writing content and stuff is then taking those things and coming up with a unique perspective on that and saying like, oh, I've seen this data set and these set of, numbers or reviews or whatever it is, and this. And actually, if you put the two together, it shows a correlation for this kind of thing, or there may be a causation from this kind of thing instead. And I think a lot of people see that as a focus for link building. They would only include like, oh, we need to make an infographic that shows the data so people will link to it. But actually, that's just helpful for users. I think having unique data and bringing a new perspective on, maybe it's old, it might be publicly available stuff, but nobody's noticed it. You bring a particular perspective that says, oh, this thing's been around for 20 years. Now we have 20 years worth of data. Let's have a look at this thing. And through analysis, I can see I've come up with something and I can't find anyone else that has said the same thing as us. Let's talk about it,
Yeah, to your point, there are so many great publicly available data sets on the internet that you can access. Like the Census Bureau has a data set, the FBI has a data set. If you want to look at like car hijackings by city, you could do that. There's data from different state agencies as well. And so there's so much free and publicly available data out there. You can also do surveys, polls, you can license data sets.
Yep.
And so I think, bringing those expert, insights through data into your pieces tells, a better story. And I do think that like building backlinks is still incredibly important in
absolutely.
2023 and 2024. So like you can't only do content, you still need to build some backlinks. And throughout my career, my favorite way to build backlinks has been through like what we've always called data-driven content. Well, It's really just digital PR, but basically telling stories with data and then pitching those stories to journalists. And if you can do that and also align that piece of content to a keyword that you ultimately want to rank for, it's a win-win. To your previous point, I just want to double click on it really quickly. I do think title tags are very important. Like with a lot of the websites we look at, simply going back and just trying to improve some of the title tags can often lead to some pretty big gains. So I think we're on the same page with a lot of these thoughts here.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're totally right. That data-driven digital PR side of things, I think, is something we've seen a lot of success with here at Candor over the last 12 months. We've really kind of developed our own content team that is now driving towards that. So I think we've seen some spectacular results for clients in that way. And I think it's something people misunderstand or misinterpret sometimes. Certain people from Google, whether it's Danny or Gary or whoever it is, will say, oh, yeah, links are less important than they were 5-10 years ago. It's like, right, yeah, but they're still really, really important. And I know Mark has talked about this extensively on other podcasts and this podcast before, and I agree with him that at the end of the day, links is a huge part of how Google understands your website. Whether other people are linking to your content what appears to be naturally or unnaturally is a huge judgment essentially of the character of your website, whether you are proving yourself as being again, coming back to EAT, that trustworthiness, that authoritativeness, right? Proving that sort of stuff. I think backlinks are still a huge part of that in 2024, and maybe they will become less important as we go forward and we move towards a more generative experience and stuff. But we're not there yet, folks. We're still in Q1 of 2024. Let's all calm down. Let's keep building links.
Yeah, I think that backlinks at a page level are maybe not as important as they used to be. I think back in 2014, 15, 16, we used to be able to manipulate the SERPs for like a given keyword a lot faster by building links to like a single given page on our website. But I think like when I'm building links in 2024, I just care about building links to my website. I don't necessarily care as much about building links to any one given page. And let's use internal linking to like do the work once we've actually built those backlinks to our site as a whole. I'm kind of skeptical on like SGE. I actually don't really think that Google wants to release it. And so I'm of the camp that like, SGE will not fundamentally change search. I actually think something will fundamentally change search, but it's not SGE.
Well, it may never make it to us here in the UK, so maybe I'll never experience SGE. Who knows?
You'll never have the pleasure of scrolling past it and then clicking on something below.
Oh, good. It's the new PPC ads that you just scroll past. We now have a whole block of text from generated search. Thank you so much, Google. Can't wait to experience it ourselves. Something I think is very relevant to content as well is not only having that unique expertise and bringing in subject matter experts if you're not yourself, bringing in that unique data, but having something to say and having a personality and a writing style, I think is something that is hugely underutilized in, again, I'm using the phrase SEO content because that's how so many people categorize it. But I come from a writing and journalism background myself, and like I always felt like I had a very, you could tell I write the way I talk, and how I podcast is kind of how I wrote my articles and reviews and stuff. And you could really kind of tell, oh yeah, that was definitely a Jack. Even if it didn't have my name on it, you could probably tell it was me who wrote that review of that movie or whatever it was. And I think that is hugely underestimated because we see it a lot in people who are kind of like essayists and stuff, and people who are writing stuff for huge publications like the New Yorker or whatever, like these more kind of like column-based kind of things. But I think there is a lot of value in that when it comes to building brand awareness, building a tone of voice and all that kind of stuff that I think a lot of people underestimate in the SEO space. Would you agree, Nate? You seem to be nodding along with me, thankfully.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm nodding because like a lot of what you said resonates with me. Whenever I write a blog post for our site, and I'm trying to be good about writing like one blog post a week this year. So publicly mentioning that goal, we'll loop back on it. I would say that I write in a style in which like I talk to like our customers. And so I do think like my pieces have a certain like tone and structure to them. And whenever I have like a sales demo, like we still make everybody talk to me yet at Positional. We don't yet have like a self-service function. If someone says to me very early on in that sales call, like I've read, some of your blog posts before, or like I've read all of your blog posts before. Like I know that there's like a very like high likelihood that we're going to then go and convert that customer. And
I don't know if you've had this before, but I've listened to the podcast before. It's happened to me a couple of times. I've been like, oh, thank God. Okay. You understand me. Thank God. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. If someone can come into that conversation with me before buying my thing and feel like they know Nate and they know how he's like about to talk to me, I think it's just super helpful from like a conversion standpoint. Aside from like a ranking standpoint. But I agree with you that I think Google has gotten a lot better at understanding different writing styles, and that's maybe another way that we could make our content uniquely helpful.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the conversion style. I think that is so much more. It's not a ranking factor. Having a unique tone of voice is never going to be a ranking factor. That's not really something you can measure apart from like, plagiarism checkers and the obvious stuff like that. But say you and I write on the same topic, Nate. We take how to conduct keyword research in 5 easy steps, and you and I write the same thing. We would write it in very different ways. We are from different backgrounds, different parts of the world, different years of experience, all this kind of stuff, and we would come at it from a very different perspective. And I think that is the key, right? That is, like you said, when you're driving conversion stuff, you can fairly easily kind of weed out like, oh, maybe this customer's not right for me. They don't vibe with Nate's writing style, but they prefer Jack's style, or the other way around. They prefer Nate's style, so maybe let's go to them instead, and all this kind of stuff. I think for me, that's something I've done a lot when it comes to not even necessarily SEO content, but this is still true, I think, for podcasters, for writers of reviews, for writers of fiction. Like, you follow your favorite author, right? Oh, the new Brandon Sanderson book is coming out, I'm going to go read his new book. Like, why do you like him? Like, oh, I like his writing style. Yeah, that's also true. Like, you use Brian Dean as an example there, like following people like Lily Ray, following people like Morty Oberstein. Like, I enjoy the way they write and they talk about SEO, so I'm going to keep up to date with what they're doing, and I learn to trust their opinion on certain things and learn to understand where their experiences are. And for me, I know this is me being, again, former writer nerdiness coming in here, but like, I follow writers from place to place. It's like, oh, now they're working at this place, I'll go and check out their new content over here, and all that kind of stuff.
So exactly what you've described, I think Google can understand within their algorithms. I do think Google has gotten very good at identifying like individual authors, and I know a lot of SEOs will debate me on this, but like I think that like exactly what you've described, that process and workflow for like a consumer trying to consume more content from specific authors that they enjoy and have had a great experience with. I think Google is thinking in a similar regard, because why wouldn't they? Like, if they know that users are thoroughly enjoying content from specific authors, why would they not try to then prioritize more content from those same authors if they know that people are enjoying it?
I think that is definitely a direction, the follow button, that is kind of being pulled over from Google Discover to being experimented in other SERPs as well. Being able to follow not only subjects and topics and stuff, but specific writers, I think is a hugely powerful thing that, as you said, I think a lot of people are underestimating, that may be really important for Google understanding different writers and different writing styles. And they realize, like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just copying this person who's a subject expert, but you don't actually know what you're talking about. You're just kind of echoing their structure.
Yeah, and I think where like most people debate me on like EE at like the author level is on like this concept of like manufacturing EAT. Like, can you actually manufacture like EAT for a given author? I don't think so. Like, I think like you build EAT like naturally, like you would.
If you're doing it right, then yeah, I think you do.
I don't think you can like force yourself to be an expert. Like, I think like you can become an expert, and like that will happen very naturally in like a lot of different ways if you actually are like an expert in this topic area and people want to consume your content. And so I don't think that you can like manufacture EAT for a given author. I think it's something that happens naturally, and I think that's what Google would be expecting too.
I like the idea of somebody saying like, oh, I proved it. I forced, EAT on this thing. I went and did all the research. Like, no, you became a subject matter expert is what you did. You accidentally did the job.
Yes. Yeah. This is one of those channels where it's like, I think people make it like more complicated than it needs to be. And often they have like an incentive to do so. A little part of me like dies every time I see like an SEO agency spend like 2 months with a client on like Core Web Vitals. I think that like people make this channel like too complex. Like, at the end of the day, we just need to do like 2 things right. Like, we need to pick like the right topics to write about or the keywords to hit, and then we need to create great content. And I think if we do those like 2 things right, like we will largely be successful. Especially when you're dealing with like a client or a website that already has like a significant backlink profile. Just doing like those 2 things right and doing them consistently is how you win in 2024. But unfortunately, I don't think that like, I don't think most people do both of those things right. I think they do one of those things wrong. It's very easy to pick all of the right keywords, but like we've been saying, it's actually much harder to create great content. Occasionally I will see like a startup, often like a very technical startup, create fantastic content, but then not pick the right keywords that they ultimately want to rank it for. And that's great. Like it's very easy to work with like those customers because they've done
That's
like
the
the
client
hard
you
part
want
right.
as an agency, right?
Yeah, they've got the content creation part down. Like we just need to kind of focus them a little bit more on specific keywords.
Yeah,
Um,
I've had that experience before where, again, funnily enough, their content writer was a former journalist and was a former English teacher and all this kind of stuff. Like, was brilliant at writing stuff. Just had no idea what SEO was, and this was 5, 6 years ago at this point, when I was kind of earlier on in my career. And I just sat them down and I was like, "You are a really good writer. We just need to tweak like 3 things, and you'll be an amazing writer for users on SERPs as well. So." Let's have a look at this. And I really love what you did here. Can we just add a heading here? That's all we need to do. Like tiny little tweaks like that. I love working with clients. I know that's a very cherry picky kind of like the dream client every time.
yeah, yeah. Just need to make sure we use the keyword in the H1. Don't forget that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's interesting coming back round to making things feeling unique as well. Like Google has really emphasized pros and cons and opinionated stuff as well. Like if you're talking about a product or service, not being one-sided and just saying, yeah, we're the best. Like the way you were talking about positional earlier on, obviously you being the CEO and co-founder and you being on this podcast to promote positional and stuff, you didn't suddenly go, yeah, we're better than SEMrush, we're better than Ahrefs, we're replacing all those tools. Like being honest about, I think this is where it fits in the industry, this is where it fits, is a huge part of, again, earning that user's trust and not kind of lying to your customers' faces and saying, yeah, you don't need us. Replace your $15,000 worth of tools with this one simple solution. Like
Yeah.
it sounds like a sales pitch, and people are already, I think by now, most people are pretty skeptical of sales pitches through websites, right?
We actually actively try to do this in the content that we create on Positional. So like we actually have like an article about how to do keyword research. And like I directly call out tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush as
Yeah.
being fantastic options because like that's making the article better for the reader. And I think we should be
instantly,
honest
if
too.
another SEO person is reading that, I go like, oh yeah, I know SEMrush and Ahrefs. Like there's that instant relatability, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and like, if you know Nate's mentioning Ahrefs and SEMrush, like he must have nothing to hide. Like, there must be something else interesting here that we should
100%.
consider.
Yeah.
And the same could be said. Like, we have an article on content optimization. We talk about tools like Surfer and ClearScope, and so I don't have any problems with like mentioning like competitive tools like in our content if like those tools are helpful for potential customers based on my experience. And again, I think if we were trying to build a business which wasn't doing anything unique from existing tooling, I don't think it would be a very good business to build. And so I never have a problem calling out, competitors or other helpful tools on our podcast or in our blog posts.
I know
And
that can
so,
often be
yeah.
a difficult conversation with clients, though, like trying to convince them to be like, hey, I know you got this great article. You need to mention a few competitors. They're like, what? No, they're going to click off. They're going to go to our competitors. You can't possibly mention a competitor. Like, no, trust me. Users will think it's actually feeling more natural and you're being more open and honest with them. Don't say, like, we're the best. You don't need anything else. We're the world's greatest, insert client industry here. Be honest with your users.
Yeah, we've all seen those like best of articles, like, best payroll providers. And I actually do
Written
really
by company one, and company number one is number one. It's like, yeah, of course.
yeah, I actually do really like that strategy because it does work. But I do think we should be like honest and transparent when we're talking about the other companies within that list. And like the same could be said for like an alternative style post, like alternatives to
Yeah.
Bank of America. I'm just picking a random company, but like I think like what a common mistake I'll actually see a lot of startups make with the alternatives pages is they'll do like, and this is kind of a rookie mistake, I'm sure for a lot of your listeners, but they'll do like Bank of America alternatives, like, choose Chase instead. Like, no, like we need for a SERP like that, where someone's like actively looking to compare, like we need to like honestly give them multiple options to compare from. And of course we can present our product within that list. But that's just like a small mistake that I see over and over and over again. And I tell our customers, and again, we're not consultants, we just provide a lot of support, that like, if we're a SERP where someone's actively looking to compare, you should give them that. And so as maybe like a general point, I think Google has also gotten a lot better at identifying search intents. And then serving like very specific, like much longer tail pieces of content to those very specific intents. Like to that part of our conversation earlier where we talked about like those old like 6,000 word blog posts we used to do. Like that used to work really well, but like search has definitely fundamentally changed in that like you don't want to be creating 6,000 word mega guides anymore. You'd rather be creating like 1,000 word guides, very targeted to a very specific long tail keyword within that keyword set. And so I think Google has just gotten a lot better at this over the last 5 years. And that's what we're trying to do with our content strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is such a kind of summary of how much has shifted over the last few years. I know I totally agree with you what we said earlier. Like the SEO fundamentals are essentially the same as they have been for the last 10, 15 years. Good content is good content and will always be good content. But the way you format that, the way you present it has shifted. And I think you're totally right. Taking what would have been a 6,000 comprehensive ultimate guide to different SEO tools is now splitting it up into here's the best backlink tools, here's the best keyword research, here's the best content optimization thing, rather than a list of 50 different things. I think having it, like you said, targeting, I think is a word a lot of people don't like to use, but I think still is very relevant. And long tail keywords, you touched on them there. Obviously, it's something we know a lot about here at Canada, having built AlsoAsked that focuses on zero volume keywords and focuses on the people also ask side of things. I think that is something a lot of people are really kind of warming up to in the last couple of years. I know Mark, our director, has gone on and done talks at Brighton SEO about this exact subject, and it's kind of now his area of expertise through years and years of working on AlsoAsked and things like that. But I think that is something people are kind of just hopefully chucking in and just hoping for the best kind of thing, rather than actually putting more thought into it and just like, oh, long tail means there's no competition. Off I go, easy traffic. And it's not that easy anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think like the keyword research tools are fairly good. I do think like, and I'm not saying this, I'm just repeating information from the internet, but like you'll hear often over that like the last few years, like some of the keyword research tools have gotten maybe not as good due to like losing certain like clickstream data sets. And as a result, like I think over the last few years, there's a much longer tail of keywords that are getting missed by traditional keyword research tools. And so for our customers, like, of course, like I'll have them start with a keyword research tool, but before that, before they actually get to a keyword research tool, I'll tell them that they should be listening to the questions that like their customers are asking them.
Yes,
Whether
absolutely.
it's like in customer support or in the sales process. And like, if you keep getting a question over and over again in the sales process, but you're not seeing like a search volume for that keyword in a keyword research tool, it's probably still a great piece of content to create and keyword to go for. One, because it's probably going to be a lot less competitive. Two, it also gives you like a piece of content that you could then use in the support process or the sales process. And so even before using a keyword research tool, I just like to keep a running list of like all of the questions I just keep getting. And when you look at our positional blog, almost like every piece of content we've created directly answers a question that we just kept getting from our customers. So I think that's a great way to find long tail keywords. Of course, there are tools like the tool set that you guys have and you've mentioned where you can find like, questions people also ask. And I think that's a great approach. One of the things that we've done with our content optimization tool, Optimize, is we have like a what's missing from your article tool within it. So it essentially like pulls out the questions that like the top SERPs are answering within their pages that are not questions people also ask, but questions that are getting addressed and answered within those pages. And then it tries to identify if you're also answering those same questions. And if you're not, we then suggest them to you to help you kind of add an information gain to like your pieces of content. So I think like the long tail of search is getting really, really important, especially in industries that are very competitive and commoditized. I think like, I've had people say to me like, Nate, should we like not start a website like in the finances space because it's just like so competitive, like we can't do it anymore. But like actually one of our customers like has started like an SEO channel recently in like the consumer finance space, but they've only focused on long tail, like extremely long tail in like the home buying space. And they're doing really, really well. So even for like, those very competitive industries, I still think there's a large long tail of keywords that we could drive traffic from. And you might not see it in a tool like Positional or a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush when you're looking at like that organic search estimate. But like in actuality, the search traffic that you're seeing in Google Search Console might be like 10 times what you're seeing in one of the keyword research tools. So I'm totally in agreement with you there that long tails should be something we're focusing on in 2024.
Yeah, I love the idea of having that conversation with the customer service team, or even directly with customers, doing a survey of customers. Like I did that with one of our e-commerce clients sort of middle of last year, I think, something like that. And it blew their mind, the kind of questions people were asking about their products. They had no idea. And I said, put that into a search right now and you will not see anything. I was like, okay, yeah, nothing. It's like, then hello, unique content. Like you are instantly unique because you can prove that nobody else is answering this question. And on the other side of it, like you were saying, what Optimize does there, that kind of content gap analysis, where you usually think of a content gap as like, okay, what topics are our competitors talking about that we're not talking about? But you're going that next step further within that content. What questions are we not answering? I think that's a really kind of like counterbalance to looking at the SERPs and looking at like, answer the public and also ask that kind of like the autocomplete stuff, and then the people also ask stuff. You can get that data from the SERPs all day long. Looking at what the competitors are doing and being able to do that is a really interesting perspective that I think a lot of people kind of gloss over, because I think a lot of people will look at a competitor's article in a bigger picture kind of way, right, and not necessarily drill down into each segment, each section, answering specific questions and say, hey, how come we're not saying this thing, but our competitor is saying this thing? Or how come they answer this question? And the thing I talked about whenever I'm a guest on a podcast, this is usually my topic, is if your customers have questions, you should have the answers. And like, if you have an idea, especially if you're an e-commerce site, I've found this with, maybe this is just my background in e-commerce a lot of the time, but I think this is also true for SaaS and a lot of other stuff as well. Like, if you think people are asking questions, if you found it on a SERP or in a forum somewhere, searching through things like Reddit and Quora and, God forbid, Mumsnet and stuff like that, the darker places of the internet.
Black Hat World.
Yeah, Black Hat World. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can find sources of information that you would not find from just looking at the SERPs, right? You get real life, actual customer information, and you see one person complain or have a question, and dozens of people go like, oh yeah, I had the same thing. Oh, I'm tagging this to bump this up so I get the answer later. All this kind of stuff. You should have the answers. You as the brand, as the client, as a site should have the answers to those questions, because that is instantly unique content that is essentially being researched for you by your customers and users.
Yeah, I am totally addicted to these long tail keywords because like, search can take time, right? Like it can take time for your content to rank, and it's addicting to go after these very long tail keywords, because if you can rank on like the first page like tomorrow, it has just this
heck
like
of a lot quicker, yeah.
very positive feedback loop to then make me want to go and create more of those pages.
Do you have an addictive personality, Nate? Do we need to have a conversation? Is this an intervention podcast secretly?
I think almost like all entrepreneurs have an addictive personality. I think like you have to, if like, you get up every day and like you want to go out and like build something. Like I'm addicted to like building. I really think that most entrepreneurs kind of have that like that like nausea or anxiety that if they're not like if they're not moving something forward, they're moving backwards.
Yeah, definitely.
And I do find myself like I do have a personality in the sense that like I want to feel like I'm continuing to move forward.
Yeah.
And I'm addicted to that feeling of moving forward. So maybe it's ranking for like a long tail keyword, maybe it's like adding a new feature. maybe it's like making sure that I respond to all our customers by the end of the day. Like I feel like I do like to work. It is something that gives me a lot of like joy in my life. But I would say in some sense I am addicted to work, and addicted to search more specifically.
I think that's like you said, a very common thing founders and entrepreneurs say, right? You have to really have that drive within you. Like I find myself, I am not that kind of person. I am definitely not got the entrepreneurial spirit. I totally admire people that do, and I find that drive so fascinating and so interesting when you get like you said, you see a positive thing and you get that positive feedback loop and you start building upon that. I think you're totally right with the long tail keywords as well, right? Having that, for want of a better phrase, like instant or much quicker feedback than we'll see how it does in 3 months. Yeah, we'll see how it does in 6 months. Like 3 days later we're getting traffic. It's like, yes, there you go.
Yeah. This is so important, especially for like early stage companies, on like two levels. Like one, like content SEO is a big commitment. Like and I tell companies like it's going to take 12 to 24 months for this to like really start working. But then I'll tell companies that, and then they'll come back to me in like 2 months and be like, why isn't it working yet? And I'll be like, well, you published like 4 blog posts. That's like why it's not working. But like the longer tail space just like gives, especially like early stage startups, like a feeling that they're doing something right. And I think it helps buy them into the channel as like something they want to keep working on, because they get kind of those early signs of success that at least something is working. So I do think like long tail keywords are just helpful for driving traffic, but also helping to like buy people into a strategy. And also too, like for early stage founders, like there's a lot that's going wrong every day. And so if you can, and you constantly feel like you're losing. And so if you can get a quick win by ranking on the first page for a long tail, it just makes you feel good.
We've all got to have those quick wins that keep us going, that wake us up on a Monday morning, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Nate. It's been a pleasure to talk with you for the last hour or so. I feel like we're mostly just agreeing with each other and talking about great content, which is lovely to have. It's always nice to have somebody who has just a totally different perspective from me, but we actually come together and have similar opinions, and I think similar kind of ideas of what will make content good and useful in 2024.
Yeah, Jack, this has been so much fun. Apologies for largely agreeing with you the entire time.
Maybe it doesn't have to be fights all the time.
Yeah, you're coming on our podcast pretty soon, and so as I'm putting together the episode outline, I'm going to try to disagree with you on a whole bunch of things. So get prepared for that. But thank you again for having me on this podcast. This was so much fun.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, hopefully we'll have to come up with something really controversial. We'll have to get a fight in there somewhere on the Optimized podcast.
Do you want to do controversial SEO takes?
Just controversial SEO take, hot takes.
Controversial SEO takes with Jack. That would be such a fun episode.
Sounds like we're planning the podcast live on air right now. I'm down for it.
I'm going to start working on the outline. And for all your listeners, if you are curious about what we're building at Positional, you can check us out at positional.com. We're still in our private beta, so you can't sign up on the website yet. You kind of have to talk to me so I can show you around how everything works. But if you want to talk to me and you want to do that, you can do that on our website at positional.com.
Awesome. Links for that, listeners. If you're listening on the podcast version, they're in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, they'll be in the pinned comment and the show description. So go and check those out in the show notes. Awesome. Well, thank you, Nate. Thank you for joining me. We will kind of have a follow-up to this on the Optimize podcast in a few weeks as well. So listeners, stay tuned for that. Go and subscribe to Optimize now if you want to hear more of me and Nate apparently trying to have a fight about controversial SEO takes, because I think that's going to be fun.
That's all we're going to do. As just a quick one, like I might ask you about like buying backlinks. Should we do it? But we'll save that for later. Thanks, Jack.
Save the spice for later, Nate. Save the spice.
Take care.
Thanks, man. Take care. And that's all we have time for here on Search with Candor. Thank you so much to Nate Matherson for joining me. If you haven't already checked out Positional, I highly recommend you go and check out some of their cool tools, some of the stuff Nate brought up on the episode. I'll put links for everything in the show notes, so you can go to search.withcandor.co.uk, go to the blog post there, and you'll find everything for what Nate and I talked about, essentially. I'll also put links in the show notes and the video description if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. So please do click down below and check out Nate, check out Positional, and all of the kind of different topics and articles we've been discussing as well. Thank you so much for watching or listening, however you are watching or listening. I hugely appreciate all the support you've been giving throughout Season 3 and Season 2 as well, but it's very cool to see so many people sticking around and jumping on and being brand new listeners in Season 3. I've got a few messages and DMs and stuff like that from people saying, hey, I just discovered the podcast on YouTube, or oh, my friend or colleague or whoever recommended the podcast. So huge thank you to everybody who is spreading the good word of Search with Candor and helping us grow and reach more new people in SEO and digital marketing. I've got a fantastic slew of guests coming up in the next few weeks, including the likes of Hannah Butcher, Beth Woodcock, Gus Peloja, and of course, Mark Williams-Cook coming back for the monthly recap that is the Core Updates monthly episode that we will do at the beginning of March. So stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks. Mark and I will have a lot to talk about from the month that was February, so please do look forward to that in a couple of weeks. Until then, thank you so much for listening and have a lovely week.